Painting a scene which is mostly in the shade can be a little challenging. It's a question I'm often asked on workshops and comments on previous videos, the problems with painting shadows or objects in the shade. Hello, my name is Tim Wilmot, and in this video I'll cover how I handle my take on painting shadows with watercolor. So this is my subject for the painting in this video. It's a street in the town called Montpont-Ménestrol in France, but it could be anywhere. And that's the thing, we don't need to go to fancy places like Venice for painting inspiration. It can be in your own backyard, so to speak. Anyway, a simple scene, but lots of shade. Probably, what would you say, about 80% in the shade. So I need to plan my approach with this so that I don't end up with a big grey mess. So for a start, look at the objects in the shadows. For a start, this white van here, quite a prominent white van. Obviously being a lighter colour, good range of values within the shadows. We've got a nice bit of reflection, so the sunlight is coming from the left. I presume it's bouncing off this wall on the building here on the right, and then we've got a nice bit of light reflection on the side of the van. We've got also these stripes, the pedestrian crossing here as well. Look at the values of these stripes. They're almost the same lightness, the same value as the reflection on the side of the van. Also, we've got some other objects to help the composition. We have these no entry signs either side of the road. I'll probably, in fact I will, I'll put in a figure. A street scene always will need a figure or two, or many, just to again help with the composition and help with the scale and help us with connecting things. So I can have a figure deep in the shadows as well. Okay, so let's see how we get on. So first, of course, the initial outline drawing, and I'm using a 3B pencil here just to get in the main shapes of what I'm painting. So I started there with that, with these strong angles, almost like a 45-degree angle on that left-hand building, and then the background houses, and then over on the right-hand side, some strong, that very hard edge of the house on the right, deep in the shade at the top of the house. And then just some lines indicating the top of the ground floor and that first no entry sign. By the way, if you like these videos, please consider supporting me via Patreon at www.patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. Every month or two I set a painting project for my members, and for a small pledge, cost of a cup of coffee, I'll give you a personal critique with some extra hints and tips. So for more information on these little painting challenges that I set, please go to my Patreon site. You'll find the links in the description of this video. And also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Subscribe to this channel to get automatic notification of future videos. So continuing on, so I've done the white van there, the other no entry sign on the opposite side of the street. And there's a few cars in the distance there, some light cars. Now a figure, I said I was going to get in a figure. Let's just put in one figure. And the nice thing about putting a figure into shadows is that you don't need to get hung up about being too accurate with arms and legs, and they can be sometimes a tricky thing to paint. So just painting the top of somebody's body is just all that we need to give the impression that there's a figure somewhere there in the shadow of the shade. We don't need to think about details on legs and feet and so on, which can sometimes be the downfall in a painting. So, drawing done. Now, starting with my first wash, and if I could just very briefly mention my palette. So on the right hand side I got neutral tint at the top, then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, and I'm using a lot of the cerulean blue for that sky. Where was I? Cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, a Windsor red, a light red, and then two up from the bottom, cadmium orange and cadmium yellow. So I'm aiming to cover the whole of the page here, apart from those areas that are going to be bright, going to be white or quite bright. So I'm going to be covering up most of the paper here, and I'm just going in with the base colors. So notice on the left hand side I've put in the base color of that wall. Nice warm, that wall had a nice warm color, nice warm tone to it. So I'm getting in that base color. And this is the other thing about shadows, is that we don't want to try and make them too grey. We want to try and add in some colours in there just to make them a little bit more interesting, so that they're not too bland and boring and all one value and all one colour. So nice and warm on the left hand side and a little bit cooler on the right hand side. So a big mop brush, plenty of paint on the brush, and going over the those white stripes on the pedestrian crossing, because I'll later go in with the colour of the road and try and do a little bit of careful negative painting around those stripes. You can be quite bold with these colours. You might, with watercolour, you might think, when you put the paint down on the paper, you might think, oh gosh, that's a bit too bright or that's too dark. Things are going to dry lighter with watercolour. Sometimes they're a lot lighter than you want to, and you then have to maybe go over with another layer on top to go a bit darker. So you have to be thinking about that to try and compensate with the way watercolor works with that drying process. So now everything has dried. I've actually just fast forwarded this video, so I would have used a hairdryer just to speed up the process. And now I'm going in with the darker values and some of these shadows. I'm going to start with the background, start off with the slightly lighter values, if you like, in the background with a smaller brush now, because I'm trying to be a little bit more detailed with my work. So painting around the car in the distance. There's some kind of a big container as well, almost in the middle of the scene. So as I say, this is a smaller mop brush, and just to get a bit more control, I'm holding it a little bit closer to the point, and then just continue on completing those background buildings. Now to make some foliage colour here, some leaf colour, I've just made I don't actually use green. I know I've got viridian green in my palette and cobalt green, but I normally make up a leaf colour or foliage colour just using mainly ultramarine blue and a yellow, any blue and any yellow, and you get some nice more realistic greens rather than sort of false greens. Sometimes the green, when you buy green paint, it is not always, in my view, not always realistic. Another nice green is using cobalt green that I've got and yellow ochre. That's quite a nice combination as well. So just a few little details there in the background, not too many, because we don't want to draw the attention of the viewer too much to that background. So I've finished with that. Now these very dark shadows at the top of this house on the right. So you can see that's a lot darker than the background buildings, deliberately so. And the building now appears, or will appear, a lot lighter with those shadows around them. And that's the thing with watercolor, is to get the light, if you put some darker values against it, then with that contrast, the light is going to appear a lot lighter. Now, on the left-hand side, I want to still keep the buildings warm in color. So, of course, this is in the shade, but we want to not make it too grey. So I am predominantly using there, well, a little bit of orange. I'm mixing down there in that bottom well. I'll mix it with yellow ochre and cadmium red. Over to where those trees are, and it doesn't matter if things bleed, one bleeds into the other, that doesn't matter. Now, a little bit of careful negative painting here around the van, this white van, just to the left of the centre, and that first no entry sign on the left, so just need to be a little bit careful there. And on the left hand side, this is on the side of the picture, so again a bit like the background, we don't want to be too detailed here. So to get the effect of this old building and the texture of the walls, I'm really sort of applying the paint, do you see, with these sort of random brush strokes, just to get that feeling of the texture, the stonework texture of those walls. So continuing on down around the van, now to get the colour of the road, I'm going to have to go a little bit darker. This figure, I just painted right over the figure there. It's going to be a lot darker than the shadows around the figure. And as I said before, the paint's going to dry lighter, so we will still see the outline of the pencil outline that I did previously. And this painting might still look like a terrible mess, but generally with watercolor, if you're patient, things generally turn out a little bit better. Hopefully they surprise you with how much they transform themselves as you're progressing through the painting and adding the final touches. So as you're going through a watercolor painting, don't get disheartened with halfway through the painting with what it looks like. So I'm just messing up some of those white stripes along the pedestrian crossing. They don't need to be too precise. Most pedestrian crossings are not pure white, and the paint gets worn, and they lose their edges. So you've got to think about those edges on objects like that. Building on the right hand side, starting off fairly cool and light at the top, painting around as carefully as I can around that second no entry sign. So do you see what I'm doing now? I'm adding in, I applied that initial shadow color in the top right corner, but it was too gray. So I need to, while it's still moist, and timing is very important here, while it's still moist or damp, I can go in with some color slightly thicker in consistency to the color the wash that I put down before, so that we don't get sort of any nasty blooms or cauliflowers appearing. So it's got to be thicker. You've got to think about the ratio of water to paint, and that's what you can do. As I'm doing now, I'm adding in the darker colors on the left hand side, and because the paper is still damp, it's still quite moist, I'm getting these soft edges, but the paint has to be a lot excuse me, a lot thicker in consistency. To help those edges, you can also do a little bit of, well, I use a little bit of smudging with the fingertips, as you saw, just to, again, timing is important to do that. Normally when you just applied it, just with a fingertip, just lightly smudge a few areas, and you need to sort of rough up a painting. It can't be too pretty and precise. So there's the darker value on the back of the van. It was too light, so I need to apply that darker value to the back and leave the right hand side of the van, because that's where the reflection is. So now a little bit of shadow and windscreen to that that little vehicle in the background, and something underneath, a little bit of shadow underneath. Draw the shadows over to the right, connecting with the building. That's the other thing with shadows, is they're very good at connecting different objects, different elements of the painting. So here in a street scene, where you've got dominant buildings either side of the picture, we're using shadows to connect one side with the other, rather than ending up with a painting of two halves and it not looking too right from a composition point of view. These shadows dragging across the street can help. Now, I was saying we need to dirty up things, so I'm now just splattering the painting with some clearer water. And again, you need to be careful with the timing of this. Doing it too early while the paint is still very wet on the paper, you don't get too much of an effect with these cauliflowers. Or if you leave it too late, then nothing will happen. The paint's dry on the paper and you're just applying water on top, nothing's going to happen. So you need to be a little bit careful with the timing of that, and just practice that. So I was just splattering in a random direction there, just to get adding another dimension to it, and just let it do its own thing. You may not want to speed up the drying process with a hairdryer, unless you thought you'd overdone it and you wanted to try and terminate that the effect of these cauliflowers or these blossoms. So just let it dry naturally, which is what I'm doing now. So I've got a smaller brush. This is a Raphael mop brush. This is a Raphael mop brush. I think this is a size 4 or a size 2. Just to help me get in a bit more control with this figure, which is darker than the surrounding areas, and paint's a little bit thicker. And I said with figures in shadows, we don't need to bother too much about legs, get hung up with legs and details of feet and arms and so on. So just drawing that figure in, we've got a nice bit of a silhouette with the top of the figure, and I'm smudging in. I did do a little bit of those legs and feet, but as I look at it, I don't want those legs to be too prominent, so I'm just smudging it a bit, and it will dry a little bit lighter as well. While I've got this dark paint, I can add on a few more details to the van. A bumper at the back of the van. And a few more details on the building. I'm really at the if you think about a painting in stages, so stage 1 is doing the outline drawing, stage 2 is the initial wash, stage 3 are the darker values, the main dark values in the painting, and now we're almost at the detail stage of the drawing, of the painting rather. And as we go through the painting, we're dropping down the size of the brush. So now I'm using a smaller synthetic brush and just picking up a few details here and there. I think this is an Escoda brush, just ideal for getting in some darker values and details. So the consistency of the paint now is, it's almost more paint than water, and I'm just picking up any sort of darker value in that top mixing one. I generally mix the darker values out of those three wells there on the side. I generally mix darker values in the top and then cools in the middle, and then warmer colors in the bottom one. Now these no entry signs, all I need to do excuse me, all I need to do is just paint the two red halves. Or you could just do a red circle and then with some white paint, of course, add the dash across the middle. But I'm just doing a tiny bit of careful painting around those two halves. Now, because they're in the shade, they're not going to be bright red, so I need to tone it down a bit, and I add in a little bit of alizarin crimson, and my red anyway is contaminated with other colors as well, so it's not as bright a red as when it came out the tube. So a lot darker than a bright red. And all along the while, the paint is still drying where I was doing the splattering. It's still doing its things. I need to be a bit careful when I'm actually painting here over it. I don't smudge it and ruin the effect of what the watercolor is doing. I've got to add a bit more definition to these buildings. Just a few lines here and there, but again, being careful not to overdo it at this stage, particularly on the sides of the painting, the left-hand side, the right-hand side, not too much detail. So, for example, on the right-hand side, this house had, in the photograph, they had quite a prominent door, a lot lighter in value than the surroundings. So I could have made a feature of that. Maybe other artists would have done that, but I'm choosing not to. Just going to give the implication of a door or some kind of architectural structure or architectural detail in there. Just continuing on with this brush, a few dry brush strokes, smudge out things if I want a soft edge or I've just overdone it a bit. Try and retain the lighter areas there above that ground floor. And using these dry brush strokes, we can now give a few tire marks on the road, just a few, and they help with the perspective as well. In fact, this painting is an exercise in perspective with the you see with the left-hand side of the right-hand buildings, but those lines on the road, they're going to help draw the eye of the viewer into the picture. A drain pipe or something on the left. And as we're adding in more detail here, closer to us, in the foreground and in the middle area, because of the lighter value of the background, that's pushing that back. Hopefully, we can see that receding into the distance. Sometimes on vehicles, I do a little bit of details around the wheel arches, but not to overdo it, because a bit like legs and arms on people, I don't want to do too much detail there. I think you can it can end up looking not so realistic, and I want to try and paint in a loose style here, and not concentrate on any detail as such. Just going around the painting, I need a little bit more on this right hand side just to fill up that top right corner there. It's quite a big, it's actually quite a big area there, that top right corner, but hopefully with that little bit of yellow ochre that I splashed into the shadows because they're a little bit grey, that will make a difference. Again, I'm just with these marks, just almost dancing around the painting and just adding in a little mark or two to give the impression of a street that's not ultra clean. It was clean, but it's you know, there might be little bits of chippings and stones and maybe a little bit of litter there, possibly. Don't get me wrong, it's a nice clean street, but you need to again rough things up a little bit. And while I've still got this brush, we can add in some utility cables, telephone lines or whatever across the street. Another way of joining up in a street scene, the left hand side with the right hand side, get in some cables, or it could be quite often I paint streets with some bunting or flags or a banner, a nice banner across the street. Just adds in something there to connect those two halves, and something in the top portion of the picture, balancing up the shadows that are going across. But in this example, there aren't too many. Put some doors on the van. Perhaps some signage as well, being a commercial van. And hopefully putting in those darker values around the van, it made it look white, but as regards values go, it's not white. It's in the shadows. So I just need to think about the relativity of all these different values that I'm putting into those shadows there, and trying to keep things appearing white if they are white. But that over on the right hand side, the building that where the sun is hitting, that's probably one of the brightest areas of the picture, and a combination of different edges in that top shadow as well, hard edges of the shadow underneath the eaves of the roof, and then a soft edge where the building is meeting with the sky on the sort of left, if I could describe it, the left hand edge of the right hand building, a soft edge. Now this figure needed to be a little bit darker, so I'm using almost neat ultramarine blue and neutral tint for the top of the figure, with the light behind it. So again, we've got that maximum contrast between the light behind the figure, the dark figure, nice hard edges, but not I'm just trying to blend in. I've blended in from the waist downwards, that figure, so it just sort of melts into, blends hopefully quite nicely into the shadows. And that's it, we're done. So here is the finished painting. An exercise in handling a painting, a scene that's predominantly in the shade, and trying to make that, because it's such a big area of the painting, it's such a big area of the composition, trying to include different objects within that area, different shapes of objects as well. So we've got the square of the van, we've got the circles of the no entry signs, we've got the rectangles, if you like, of the stripes. So my approach is to have these different objects, different values as well. Look at the light of the reflection hitting the van, these the white stripes, which help with the perspective as well, leading the eye into the composition, the darker value of the figure. We lost the legs. We kind of I used my fingers and didn't really pay much attention to the overall legs, and the colors as well. So a nice sort of warmish color on the left hand side, and a lighter, a cooler color on the right hand side. And then using different watercolor techniques, different edges. So we had soft edges when I went in with the darker values while the paint was still moist. Softer edges there. We've got some hard edges as well. With the splattering, another effect that is really only available with watercolor. You can't get that with oil painting or acrylics, and you get some quite nice effects. Don't overdo it. It needs a bit of practice, but you get some nice effects with that. And some dry brush strokes as well. So if you look at the window here, some of the tire marks and other details on the building, some dry brush strokes where you're using the brush almost with hardly any water at all. So I hope you liked this picture, painting objects in shadows. For more videos, please look at my channel. Watch out for the next video in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. And if you want to have a go at paintings like this and get a critique from me, which is normally a video critique, I'll send you a little short video of the critique, please go up to my Patreon site, www.patreon.com/Tim Wilmot, TimWilmot. Thanks for watching, and catch up with you next time.